Hey market warriors, welcome back to Courage Pays Better Than Fear Trading. My name is Jeremy Ritz and welcome to your go-to for stock market news, tips, and motivation to dominate the markets. And I'm super excited today because this is the beginning of my three-part series of preparing for Q1 NVIDIA earnings that are coming on May 28th. This is going to be massive and we have to be ready and prepared for what is to come. And what better way to do that than by taking three opportunities together to dig in to the charts, to dig into the numbers, and come up with a plan so that on the 28th, we are ready to tackle this beast that we call NVIDIA, the king of the market. Let's go. All right, so welcome everybody. Thank you for being here with me. I am getting ready to trade the open here. It's 9:22 on a Friday, Eastern time. And so I got the charts in front of me. And while I'm getting ready to do that, I wanted to start putting this video together, this three-part series, getting you ready for NVIDIA earnings on the 28th. And it's the name on every trader's lips. It's NVIDIA, it's the king. And sure, it's been beat up quite a bit, but they're not just a chip maker, they're the heart of the AI revolution. We know that. And they're synonymous with AI. In fact, if you would ask someone about artificial intelligence, more than likely the first thing that they're gonna say is NVIDIA or Jensen or Blackwell in relation to their chips. But this company is a beast, $2.7 trillion market cap. They own 95% of the $158 billion GPU global market. I mean, I can't even wrap my head around that. Their chips are everywhere. They power ChatGPT, self-driving vehicles, not to mention data centers, which are popping up everywhere. And I mentioned Blackwell, their Blackwell architecture. It's a monster, pulls in about 11 billion in revenue. And that was just in Q4. So this is a company that's really reshaping the markets. And it's one that we need to be aware of, and they're going to have a significant opportunity to show us where they're headed here on the 28th. And I want you to be ready. All right, so let's take a look at how NVIDIA has been crushing it. Their Q4 earnings were straight up epic. Now that might not be reflected in the move in the stock following earnings, but 39.3 billion in revenue, up 78% from last year. And earnings per share, 89 cents, beating Wall Street expectations by 7.6%. And the real powerhouse, their real MVP in terms of making money, it's their data center business. It raked in $115.2 billion. These numbers are just astronomical, and that's double than what they did the year before. And this is why NVIDIA has been a rocket ship for investors. But it hasn't been smooth selling, and we know that. Why is that? Because even after that epic earnings report, the stock didn't really move. It actually gapped up and faded down. And we're going to take a look at the charts here in a little bit. And in fact, NVIDIA is down 19% this year, which is pretty significant for this company. And we all know why. Trade war, tariffs, political issues, especially with China. And there's concern that that's going to cause a slowdown in AI spending in your major companies, your Mag 7, but we're really not seeing that. But does the company have a chance to turn things around with this earnings report? Let's check it out. So Wall Street is hyped for this earnings report, and they're forecasting a bump in revenue, 43 billion in fact, which is going to be a 52% leap year over year, and 93 cents per share in terms of earnings. So we're going to see some quality numbers, and NVIDIA's got a track record of going even beyond that. So if that's the case, and let's say that there's an even bigger beat, we can see a subsequent move in the stock price. But here's the challenge. What are we going to see with data centers? Are we still going to see growth there? Are we going to see the Blackwell chips delivering? Well, trade tensions and budget cuts stir up trouble? That's what we have to find out in this report, and that's why we really want to pay attention to what CEO Jensen Huang has to say. So if NVIDIA nails this report, we're going to see a massive rally that's going to lift the entire market. We're not just talking NVIDIA, we're talking all of tech, the indices, you name it, it's going to pump. But if they miss, or if there's a downgrade in forecast, then we're going to see a subsequent move down. But we'll get into that more in parts 2 and 3 of this series. But for now, let's go check out the charts and see what has happened the previous few times they've reported earnings. So here's a glorious chart of none other than NVIDIA. You can see at the time that I am recording this, NVIDIA is up $1.20. The market overall today is up. But what I want to look at is not the price action today, because we're going to get to that as we work through the series. But I want to look at the response that we've had in the last several earnings reports and whether or not we gapped up or down. So if we look at the last earnings report from February 26, right here, you see that we did have a slight move higher. It was a gap up, but then what happened? It faded down. And this was quite the move here on February 28th. It dropped from the highs that it made that day, a total of $14.80. So it was quite the move down. So it was unable to hold on to its small gap up. So it was a gap up, fade down. If we go to the earnings prior to that, we have to go back to November 20th of 2024. That's right here. We again had a gap up, but it wasn't able to hold on to its gains. And what did it do? It sold down and it started a downward movement. All right, so the last two, gap up, fade down. Now, let's go to the previous earnings report. This was August 28th of last year. It's right here. And what happened on this report? They gapped down. So the last three, gap up, fade down, gap up, fade down, gap down. Let's keep going backwards. Let's study these charts. So let's go back to, this was May of last year. All right, so this is a full year ago. This is when we had that massive gap up where NVIDIA for the first time hit $1,000, and then the split was announced. And you see the move that really took place from there. So that was the last gap up that we had on NVIDIA. It was 1 year ago. All right, so let's go to the earnings report prior to that. So here is February of 2024. And we had 3 days of a pullback into that 20 EMA on the daily. And then what did we have here? We had a gap up. All right, so the last 5 reports, and that's all we're going to go through in this video. But we had gap up, fade down, gap up, fade down, gap down. And then the previous 2 times from that were gap ups. Does the probability play into the favor of a move higher for NVIDIA? Well, there are a lot of things to factor in here. The numbers that they're going to report, what is going on in terms of the trade war. But in terms of sheer probabilities, 2 gap ups, fade down, and then the time prior, a gap down. It could be time for a move on NVIDIA to the upside. And we're going to get into an even deeper study as we work through this series to help make sure that you're prepared come May 28th, that you're able to tackle this earnings and profit via your trading. What are your thoughts after part 1 of this series? Does NVIDIA gap up? Do they gap down? Let me know in the comments. And on your way out, please make sure you smash that subscribe button, and I'll see you back here for part 2 of this NVIDIA series. NVIDIA earnings is getting even closer. And this report has the potential to push the entire market to new all-time highs. Let's dig into what the strengths and concerns are that we need to be aware of that can impact the price move come the 28th. All that in part 2 of my NVIDIA earnings series, kicking off now. Welcome back to part 2 of the NVIDIA earnings series. And today we're going to look at those factors that can propel the price action of NVIDIA on earnings into the stratosphere, as well as those things that can hinder it. And today we're going to utilize AI in this process. And I took the last investor presentation from NVIDIA, put it into Grok, asked it to give me what are those 3 things that could move this stock forward on earnings, and what are those 3 things that could draw it down. And we're going to take a look at those in addition to updating where we are on the charts with technical analysis to give us a complete picture of where we're headed for the 28th. And remember, this is part 2 in the series. Okay, so according to Grok, here are the reasons for optimism for NVIDIA. And it's the robust data center growth and Blackwell ramp, with NVIDIA reporting record data center revenue of $33.6 billion, up 93% year over year. And that's driven by the rapid production ramp up of Blackwell, which delivered $1.1 billion in revenue in its first quarter. And there's demand for it, particularly for inference from major cloud providers like Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, who are adopting it early. So the data centers are at the tip of the spear here, but they're also moving into diversified AI ecosystems. They're expanding, according to Grok, and they're moving into areas like robotics and healthcare, showing that they have a broadening market reach. And some of the key announcements with that, and we want to see updates here on the 28th about Project Digits, a personal AI supercomputer that's powered by the Grace Blackwell superchip, and the Cosmos platform for autonomous vehicles and robotics, adopted by companies like Uber and Toyota. And pay attention to the partnership with healthcare leaders, because that's something that really hasn't been discussed much. And it could further expand NVIDIA's presence in the $10 trillion healthcare and life sciences sector. So pay attention to that and what that could mean for NVIDIA's growth. And then finally, just the outlook on revenue alone. Q1 revenue is forecasted at $43 billion. That's a 9.4% sequential increase from $39.3 billion, exceeding the prior quarter's outlook of $37.5 billion. These are massive numbers. And this growth is expected across both data centers and gaming segments, with improving supply dynamics for gaming and robust demand for AI-driven compute and networking solutions. Now, what about concerns? Grok provided those to us as well. We'll start with gaming segment weakness. And despite strong end demand, gaming revenue declined 11% year over year to $2.5 billion in Q4, primarily due to supply constraints. And while NVIDIA expects strong quarter over quarter growth as supply improves, the reliance on resolving these constraints introduces uncertainty, and any delays in scaling supply could hinder recovery. So pay attention to that. And then we have rising operating expenses. Outlook projects operating expenses of about $5.2 billion. That's up from $4.8 in Q4, with full year operating expense growth expected to be in the mid-30s% range. This increase is driven by stock-based compensation, acquisition-related costs, and other expenses could pressure margins if revenue growth does not keep pace. And investors may scrutinize cost management in the upcoming earnings, especially as NVIDIA invests heavily in new AI and robotics initiatives. And then finally, dependence on third-party manufacturing and supply chains risk. This is where we get into tariffs. So relying on third parties for manufacturing, assembly, packaging, testing, this poses risk to production and delivery timelines. And supply chain disruptions, as have been seen in the gaming segment, or delays in scaling Blackwell, this could impact NVIDIA's ability to meet strong demand. The global economic and geopolitical uncertainties right now further heighten these risks, and they can affect investor confidence if these issues persist. So pay attention to any reference in this next report about gaming segment weakness, increases in operating expenses, and the supply chain in terms of how that is impacting NVIDIA. Now, most importantly, let's take a look at the charts. Let's see where NVIDIA is at as we are updating the chart from last week, and to get an idea of where potentially we could go upon the earnings report on the 28th. So you can see right now, we have broken above all the moving averages. They are all below us. NVIDIA is definitely in a bullish trend. And we could see that this upper trend line resistance that was established back in January
has been busted. And we actually gapped above that here from Friday to Monday. We had that big move and we actually crushed through that resistance with a gap up from Friday to Monday on the news of a trade deal between the US and China. And that move didn't stop. It continued to push up. It got it above all of those moving averages. And now it is floating out here. And so, being that it has cleared those resistance areas in the form of the moving averages, what we need to start looking at are those previous highs that NVIDIA has made. So we're looking at this one here first. This was February 18th. Now, this was a lower high, but this price point is 143.33. So in the interim, that's going to be a resistance area that we're watching. And then if we go back to the next recent high, and this was a lower high from its all-time high, this was on January 24th. Let's mark that out. That's 148.92. And then when we mark out NVIDIA's all-time high, that's right here. And look at this selling that came in this day. This was a massive drop after hitting all-time highs. I'm going to put an arrow to this candle. And this was following a speech at an electronics conference from Jensen Huang. This was January 7th. We're going to mark out this all-time high, and that's 152.97. So as NVIDIA begins to push higher, we want to pay attention to how is it going to interact with these recent highs and actually these lower highs that it made after hitting an all-time high back in January. And how it interacts with these areas is really going to tell us a lot. And if we just look to the left here, we could see that this 143.47 area, there was resistance here prior to January. So if we go back into December and even back into October, we could see that NVIDIA struggled to get through that price point. And while it did here in November around the election and it pushed higher, it couldn't sustain that pop. And so this is going to be the critical key area that if it can close above it, that 143.47, then it could start testing the 148s, 149s, this 152, 153. And then if it can get above there, we're in price discovery where it can begin creating new all-time highs. And while I'm not yet ready to give my bull case and bear case for what's going to happen on earnings, I do think that there is potential upside here on this report. And I'm going to be sharing that with you guys in part 3 of this NVIDIA earnings series. So there you have it. We asked AI to give us some help with an AI company's earnings report here coming up on the 28th. We have the strengths that could propel this company forward that we want to pay attention to in the report that follows the actual numbers. And we have those areas for concern that could impact growth that we're going to be paying attention to as well. Now you're educated about that when you're listening to Jensen report. You can listen for those things and try to identify and see, hey, are they expanding in the healthcare space? Are the margins being impacted by supply chain issues? So you are educated and you're also updated on the technicals, the chart, the key resistance areas that we need to pay attention to based on those recent highs and those lower highs that were made after all-time highs in January and where potentially we can go. But like I said, I'm going to give you the bull case and the bear case for what potentially could happen. I'll let you know what I think is going to occur here based on this earnings report. And if you haven't checked out part 1, please do so of this series. Smash that subscribe button, and I will see you back here for part 3 of the NVIDIA earnings preview. Make it a great day. Here, the final part of my NVIDIA earnings preview series, and I'm going to give you my thoughts on where this thing is going, both the bull case and the bear case, because this is coming up here next week, May 28th. So get educated, get informed, and let's get ready to tackle NVIDIA earnings together. Jeremy Ritz here, Courage Pays Better Than Fear Trading, here with the final installment in my 3-part NVIDIA earnings preview series. And this video is going to be a little shorter because we've covered everything that you need to know heading into this report. And what I'm going to give you today is both the bull case and the bear case for where the price could go upon earnings. and also show you what some analysts are projecting. I'm going to show you what's happened in the last few earnings reports in terms of percentage moves. And then I'll also show you what AI says is going to happen. And I'd love to hear in the comments, what are your thoughts about where it's going to go after we go through this content? So without any further hesitation, let's just jump in here to the predictions. NVIDIA price targets, we're going right in. We've covered everything in those first two parts, but I'm going to go through the bear case, the bull case. We'll take a look at the charts. As of right now, when I'm recording this, Trump said that he wanted to recommend 50% tariffs on the EU. He talked about an additional 25% tariff on Apple if they did not make their phones here in the US. So that's dragged the market down a little bit, including NVIDIA. And we'll take a look at the charts here, put these numbers into perspective. But let's start with the bear case. All right. And this is from my analysis. And I wanted to show the last 3 times that NVIDIA has gapped down, and it's actually been 3 consecutive gap downs in a row. You could see what those percentage drops were. And how I measured that was from the close of the previous day to the next day's low. So then earnings were announced this day. So that next day, what was the low? And that's how I calculated these percentage drops. And you can see they span from 3.56 up to 8.44% in terms of declines. And that the biggest was in February here. But keep in mind, just in terms of probabilities, we've had 3 moves down on NVIDIA the last 3 earnings reports. And in looking at the charts, and we'll take a look here in a second, the bear case for me, just in terms of analyzing these numbers, these declines, let's say that we have a negative report, there's pressure from the tariffs, 117.50 would be where I see the stock falling to. Again, we'll look at the charts on this. And then the worst case scenario being about 112. Both of those situations would be buying opportunities, in my opinion, because NVIDIA is not going anywhere. They are the dominant force in the AI world, and AI is just getting started. Now, when we take a look at the bull case, these are the last 3 gap ups that have occurred. Now, these moves were quite significant. And when you go back to that May 2023 move, that was over a 30% jump. And it would be foolish to expect something like that, or even what happened in February of 24, that was a 16% gain. And in May of 2024, an 11% gain. What I'm seeing, or where I think a good spot for this to move and for it to stick and kind of cluster and chop sideways and slowly grind higher, and this is the bull case, would be that $150 mark. The all-time high on NVIDIA is around 152. And then the best case bullish scenario would be around 160 and setting a new all-time high. But what are analysts saying? I wanted to put this information on here too. And you can see that the analyst median prices are anywhere between $157 and $200 over the course of the next year. So that's a pretty significant move from where NVIDIA is trading right now, which is around $131. So I threw this into Grok. I said, hey, look at the earnings report, all the factors that are happening right now, and give me the bullish case and the bearish case of what can happen post earnings. And I'll spare you details that was shared in that report from Grok, but you could see from a bullish perspective, if everything strong is in the favor of an NVIDIA, then it's going to be between 157 and 180. And if it's bearish, $100 and $110. Now, let's take a look at the charts. All right, so here's the chart on NVIDIA. We're on the daily. And again, I'm recording this before market closes, but you can see we gapped down today off of that tariff news. We're sticking to that 10-day exponential moving average. But if there's continued weakness in the market from this tariff news, I could see us selling down into the 200 simple moving average on the daily or into this 50 SMA on the weekly. That would be good support. And then you can see here the price targets that I have on NVIDIA. Again, this bull case being that 150 target. So you can see we would come up here into this area. And notice that's not up to that all-time high that we made in January. And if we do, in fact, gap up and out of here, I do think we would then just slowly grind higher, make a new all-time high, and then whatever would happen from there. Again, there's so many uncertainties, moving parts right now in the market that it's hard to say that something's going to stick and stay unless we have some significant optimism come into the market and stay in the market and give certainty. And then in terms of the bearish case, again, if we drop down here to the 200 or the 50, that's really a decent sell-off based on the tariff news. And where I could see us dropping would be down here to this 117.55, which is close to that 50-day simple moving average. The worst case being around $112. But again, I think those dips are buyable. And that would put us down near this neckline of this double bottom. For me, the way I am playing this, and this is just me, this is not financial advice, but based on the probabilities, what has happened in the last few times with NVIDIA, those 3 consecutive gap downs, NVIDIA is due for a move higher on earnings. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to be an astronomical move, but I'm leaning more towards the bull case, and I'm watching that 150 price area for the move higher. Now, will it happen? We don't know, but I am playing this, and I am playing with size that I can afford to lose with my risk, but I'm seeing a move to 150. So there you have it, the final installment in my NVIDIA earnings preview. I hope you found some value in this. You can see how I'm going to be approaching this play here on earnings. I am bullish on this call, which kind of goes against what is happening across the board in the markets. But I do feel NVIDIA is poised for its next stage of growth. I feel like the last 3 times that it's reported, it's been somewhat punished or put into the penalty by the markets. But we're just getting started with artificial intelligence. As much as people who are exposed to AI know about it, there's a majority, and really it's the majority of the population who isn't really familiar with it. And we're just getting started. There's so much out there with AI that is just going to revolutionize our world. And I think this earnings report could be a preview of what's to come. And I think that sets up the next leg higher on this ticker who has been the king of the market for some time.